download is on this day, July 29th, 2022, that it has been 1 year and a week since I finished Mistborn Era 1. Now, I have spent the last week rereading this series and watching my reviews of this series, which my reviews were so bad, especially for the first 2 books, so I apologize for that. This is the Final Empire. I spent the last week going through all these books and rereading them, and when I say rereading them, I mean I reread these. We'll get more into that later. But I full-on reread these, and the goal of this is to come into this video 1 year later and tell you, does my opinion of this series hold? Do I think this series is worth reading? Do I think this series is worth paying extra to have on a bookshelf? And basically saying how much I love this series. Let me tell you, I fucking love this series so much, okay? That's just gonna get that out of the way right here at the beginning. I really do. I really do. I really do. It's Mistborn. It's Brandon Sanderson. That's really all you need to say. I will say that this is probably my favorite author at the moment that exists. Period. Done. So, maybe I have bias, but this is the video where I'll go in and talk about non-spoilers and spoilers about this series that really just states my opinion. So, to start off, unique magic system. In a heist story, which in and of itself is very exciting because you don't see that many heist stories, and they are fantastic when you get to them. Very mysterious world building, very sudden plot turns and twists that keep the reader on their toes when they definitely were not expecting to be on their toes. Very lovable, round, and or interesting characters that you genuinely want to learn more about, whether or not you like them. This series is freaking, insanely full of very subtle foreshadows and reveals that make a second read through the series, 4 times more deep. The amount of depth in this series, you cannot understand on a first read, and on the first read, you already think there's a frick ton of depth. So, just the sheer amount of foreshadows and very, very, very subtle hints throughout the series are fascinating. Politics, assassination, spying, infiltration, intense fighting, unique races, immense dramatic irony that is a bitch as per usual. Don't we love dramatic irony? But it's good. It's good dramatic irony. Just it makes you frustrated kind of dramatic irony. Growing conflicts that repetitively raise the stakes and challenge the reader's understanding of the world in an engaging way that keeps your interest, keep growing. You think you understand the world, and then you are repetitively reminded that you don't. And that's just really freaking well done. And to end this off, this series has the best ending I've ever read. Period. Period. This is the best ending I've ever read. I stand by that. It is the best ending I've ever read. So, this is definitely one of my top series. And I would go as far as to say that this is a series that belongs on a fantasy reader's bucket list. That is going far, but I seriously think that this is a series that every fantasy reader, whether or not you think you'll like it, should read the full series at some point in their life. And it's not just for the ending. I know I just said that the ending is the best ending I've ever read. Ever. But it's not just for the ending. It's really the development, the surprises, the sudden rushes and shocks, and sometimes panic over the reveals. And this is a series that made me cry. So, again, maybe I have bias, but I think it's a series that's at least worth trying. And sometimes you I'll get more into this later, but sometimes you feel it's easy to judge the books. And I definitely felt that way, especially if you watch my old reviews. I definitely felt that way, but when I look back at the series a year later, there's a new understanding. There's a very new appreciation I have for this that I just cannot convey how powerful these books are now that I look back at them. They're worth reading at some time in your life. Maybe you won't like them, but I'll tell you, the majority of society that have read these books have liked them. So, I seriously think, do it. And sometimes you may reach a low part, and you'll think, oh, I don't like this. Get to the end. Get to the end is all I'm going to say. Make it to the end. Don't stop in the middle of this series if you can. This is maybe the series I would tell you not to stop in the middle of the series. Because everything comes together in the last book. So when you are in a slow part, you think you're in a slow part, but I'm going to tell you that you're probably not. With one exception. We'll get into exceptions later, but give it a try. If you're here and you haven't read these, give them a try. I really think they're worth it. They are big. I know these look very small, but it is very tiny text. These are like around, I don't want to mess this up, but I want to say they're around like 230,000 words each or more. They're big. Don't underestimate these, but I seriously think they're worth the time. All year long. Just at some point in your life. Read these. Seriously, read them. Alright. Rewatching my old reviews, I realized just how critical I was of the first two. And some of that was my arrogance and my youth showing through. Some of that was my lack of understanding of the book and not being able to actually take in what was happening. Because at that time period, I wasn't really looking for the right details. And some of it was ignorance, because I, again, was missing the right details. However, now reading the book, and now that I'm like almost 19, I realized just how many of my comments were invalid, or like really misrepresenting the book, or like all those things. And I'm just saying right now that those reviews are really, really, really old. They are really, really, really misleading. Don't watch the first two reviews. If you're going to watch a review, watch the third review. Which I do have non-spoilers and spoilers in the third review. The first two are purely spoilers, and I didn't even mark it as that. And I just fixed that because that was wrong. So, they're very old reviews, and I am very disappointed about those reviews. So, really, my opinion has changed a lot, especially since I read the first book, and especially since I read the second book. My opinion since I read the third book has not changed that much, because when I read the third book, that's when I really got my kind of understanding that I have now. And that was several months after I finished the second book. So I had a time period in there to really grow as a person, for me individually, and also a time period to get more of a better perception about reading. So that's all I had for the beginning of this video, so now we'll just dive right into non-spoilers. These are going to get repetitive. I want to warn you now. But I think it'll be fine. To start off, I miss these characters so freaking much. So much. Even though they all come through to have their flaws, and there's those moments that you may lose interest in the character, or moments where you frown on the character. In the end, when you return to this series, or at least when I return to this series, they're just cherishable characters. Flaws and all. Everything about them. I feel so much nostalgia thinking about them, and really seeing the significance and importance of their humanity and their presence in this series. It's something that you, like, perhaps if you're like me on the first read, find easy to judge, but when you come back to it, it really is just their humanity shines through, and you miss them. You really do miss them. You think they're characters you wouldn't miss, but you miss them. And so just fantastic characters. Just fantastic characters. I could keep reading about these characters forever, I think. Some of them. I really could. So, just fantastic characters. As I said before, this series is fan-freaking-tastic for a reread. And that is especially true when you know all the reveals and you know the path of the story. And again, making the same point, there's just so much nostalgia that when you actually know what like ends up happening, you kind of reminisce in the characters, and you reminisce in all the foreshadows you're spotting that you totally missed the first time. And you just see how much the series just came together with the last book. It really just was wrapped up so beautifully, and it's nostalgic. And it's nostalgic to the point that when you go to attempt to skim the pages, when you go to attempt to skip scenes, you find yourself reading every single word anyway. And that's what happened to me. I told myself, I'll just skim a bunch of the scenes, remind myself of scenes I missed and stuff. I read every single word in this book. I'm not kidding. I read every single word in this book in 2 nights. With work, with streaming. I read this entire book in 2 nights, and I read every word. I was not skimming. Because it's such a good reread. It's such a good reread. The entire time I was just like gushing, and like I was already addicted to the series all over again. I could not put the book down. I was reading until 3 a.m. on a reread. That's not something I do much. So, I've just been, this reread, I've just been cherishing it. And this is a fantastic series to reread, which just more so emphasizes the fact that these are worth reading, because especially if you like them the first time, this is a series you can keep rereading through your life and probably be happy. This is a series that will stick with you with time, and you still like it with time. So, just another point in its favor. It's just a fantastic reread. Now, diving into specifics, I'm going to repeat myself here, but characters, period. Like, really, I know I said that, like, there's the nostalgia and, like, you really find them cherishable when you return, but, like, really, they just stick with you. Like, as people, they stick with you. In fact, I think they're some of the most memorable characters outside of, I'm going to say, Powder Mage. Powder Mage is a series that every time I had reviews of that series, I talked about how much I freaking loved the characters. And that's pretty much like half of my review video was talking about how much I freaking loved the characters in Powder Mage. Valerian was another series where I did like a bunch of the characters, but not all of them. Powder Mage, I loved all the characters, and I would rant on and on about that. This series, like Powder Mage, just has characters that stick with you, period. Like, you can be doing something, and you're randomly like, oh, that reminds me of like, the behavior of this character. They stick with you. Like, in your brain, you, like, always are able to call up a reference, or, like, even call up quotes they say, and just remember who they are. And I don't know, that's something I really like in a series. I really like when I can still call back to those characters and remember them. The characters look great. And hell, even though I could get really judgmental of romantic plotlines, as I'm sure everybody has noticed in all of my reviews that I don't like romantic plotlines, this series is an exception. Because, yeah, they grew on me. The pair of them really grew on me. Like, they really grew on me. And while I was definitely judgmental of them at first, I love them now. I really do. Like 6 of my wallpaper backgrounds on my computer are the pair of them. That level. Like, we're going several levels beyond when I usually go. So, this author managed to do it. I love them. I really do. They're just amazing characters. And even though a certain someone can be really stupid a lot, I will still stand by her as a fascinating lead character, and even through all the stupidity, I still love her as a character. So, characters. I love my characters. And through their flaws, I still like them. Next, fascinating epitaphs. And the reason I refer to them as epitaphs is because usually they aren't active characters. They're not characters that are in the series. So I'm referring to them as epitaphs. They are, in a way, like honorable quotes. If that makes sense? They are quotes that are honoring that person. So I think the word fits. They're all fascinating, whether they're like, usually when I say epitaph, I'm referring to the paragraphs at the beginning of all or most of the chapters in the book. And they all, most of them, if not all of them, contain like an air of mystery while also providing hints to the series, while also increasing the impact of reveals later, while also doing like developing world building, but also introducing you to a character that you never really see, but are also drawn to in a very fascinating way. And it really gets your brain going. It's a great way to get you into the mood of reading, just in a little tiny paragraph at the beginning of the chapter. It really draws you in to the setting, into the world, before you're actually getting into the story. And they were just, again, fascinating in all of their own way. And they definitely bring a lot more power into rereading the series because they contain so many reveals and foreshadows that just went the first time you read it. But they're really cool and they're amazingly well done. So I kind of want to do a reread where I just read the epitaphs of every paragraph, of every chapter. I think that'd be interesting. So I might do that. In a weird way, these books all have a very off-putting pacing. Beyond just the Sanderlanches, as people call them. A lot of people have maybe heard the word Sanderlanche if you have been looking at this author. I'm talking about more than just that. Just like, even beyond like the plot twists, even beyond that, sometimes the pacing just feels weird, and I don't have an explanation why. What I'm going to say about this is that's not bad. For some reason, it feels right, especially as you keep going. Like, it feels off, it feels weird, but the more you read at that pace, the more you're like, this is falling together, this is working. And it's kind of interesting. And that's just something I noticed on my reread, so I figured I'd mention it. There are very strong character perspectives, and this isn't just the main characters, and this isn't just the switch between perspective between books. I mean like the one-off character perspectives. There are perspectives where we only see them for like half a chapter and we never see that perspective again, but it's done in a good way. Usually that's something that would maybe upset me, that we don't get to see that character over again, but really the way Sanderson does it is fitting. And it gives you a lot more insight into the world, but it also gives you insight in another perspective of the way things are. It really helps with world building just by giving someone else's view. What does this person see in the world that all the other characters don't? Really, in a lot of stories, that's something you're missing on like a fundamental level. You don't know what the perspective of a merchant is in some story or something like that, or the perspective of a slave, or the perspective of like a ruler. Sometimes you don't get to see those things when you're reading a book. And I think the way Sanderson brings in those perspectives with just a one-off little chapter really worked well. And it's just another thing that just stood out to me in my reread. Lastly, for non-spoilers, before I dive into spoilers, is that there are really good mixes of comedy, despair, war, fighting, brutality, and curiosity/learning. Again, I don't really have much to say beyond that. Like, I can't really emphasize that. It's done amazingly. And again, this is especially when you look back at the series, especially, actually, you know what? When you look back at the series without a reread, that is what stands out. I think the most when you look back at the series without a reread is that you can remember the funny moments, but you can also remember the very intense dark moments. And you just remember that mixture, especially the curiosity and learning also. You remember that mixture of events, and it really, that memory kind of like is a good picture of the series. It's kind of like an accurate representation. Like a year later, multiple years later, I'm sure, you can still remember the series for what it is between all those different elements that you remember. Because you remember each one. You don't just remember the fighting. You don't just remember the brutal moments. You don't just remember the comedy. You remember a combination, and it really represents the series in your memory. So I think that's very interesting. And in general, before I started rereading this, I like started to recall like all the scenes I can remember, and most of these books has a lot of memorable moments, especially book 1, especially book 3. I can remember a very significant amount of both of those books. They just stuck with me. And they're fantastic. So, with that note, we'll dive into spoilers. This is probably going to be a long one, I'm sorry. Honestly, my spoiler section, this is your time to leave. I'm gonna like start by being vague and then actually get into spoilers, but my spoiler section is kind of limited. Most of my spoiler section is my complaints section because I didn't really know what spoiler-wise to talk about, because anything I bring up is just gonna be me going like, this is so freaking good, this is so freaking good, and I don't have much insight here into these very specific things, so I only have a few notes for me to explain my complaints to the series and explain how literally none of them matter anymore. None of my complaints matter to me anymore. Just gonna say that now, but I'll repeat it later. So, kind of getting into spoilers, there were a handful of things that I completely forgot about. A very specific one that actually kind of surprised me is Vin's dad. I completely forgot Vin's dad existed. I forgot that was a plot line. I forgot we actually like saw him in the scene where the Lord Ruler gets killed. I just forgot he existed for some reason. He actually did kind of matter to the plot. I just forgot. So that was interesting. I forgot a lot of the fight scenes, and I think that's just the nature of Mistborn fight scenes and the nature of me as a reader. When there's so much going on and I can't picture it because of the way I am, it's hard for me to follow the fight scene, and so it's hard for me to know what's happening because I struggle to picture things in my head. It's not completely impossible for me, but it's hard for me. So a lot of fight scenes I forgot, but that's really fine for me. Whenever I come across one in a reread, I can kind of get an idea of what's happening. It's just not going to stick in my head. The slaughter of Vin's old crew, forgot that happened, and honestly, I forgot how like intense and brutal that is, especially when you find the crew leader like hanging on a hook later. I totally forgot about that. I thought that was interesting that I forgot about that. A lot of the scenes around Dox in general, up until he died, I really just forgot a lot about Doxson. So rereading him and actually realizing, oh, you know what, I also like that character, was very interesting. I feel we definitely could have seen him more, but I think that for all the characters, so. But yeah, and what I want to say about this is that none of these scenes seemed lessened by my not remembering them, and I didn't really have a different reaction to any of them when I reached them. It seemed that I just forgot, and then now I remembered, and I'm probably going to forget again, and that's fine. There's just so much to remember in this series that you're not going to remember it all. So, I think that's logical, and I didn't really forget anything that big. So, I think that's interesting. The Conjure homeland is absolutely fascinating, and rereading that was just all of those scenes, and all of Tensoon's perspective is fascinating. Say's and Twindle's perspective were also very fascinating, and I love their research and like all they were learning along the way. How much Ellen did Spook grow as characters was shocking and surprising, but also amazing. I freaking love Ellen, and Spook really, really, really changed. But those two characters are probably the characters I would say changed the most. But following them is also Say's self-battle, like his battle with himself throughout the book, and like especially towards the ending, him discovering his role in the series is again just fantastic, and I love him as a character. He's great. Marsh really got creepy as we went on, especially with Well of Ascension, but also his perspective cued in a lot of the tension, and it's very interesting to see how he changed as a person. He's not someone we knew much about his personality of early on, but even not knowing his personality, you can still tell that something seemed off, and it really kept you... It made every scene you were reading with him, like, read it like this. And just in my reread, I thought that was fascinating. Yeoman. I mean, I mentioned him a lot in my Hero of Ages review, but his understanding and his debates with Ellen and all of that was just fascinating. And he was a character we didn't see that long, but I think he was a great, like, short-term character, and he stuck with me. I'm not sure if that he sticks with everybody, but he was just a great character. Very blunt, very straightforward. I like that. And again with the epitaphs, especially from Alendi and Preservation, both of those were fantastic. And rereading all of Alendi's epitaphs and like knowing the nature of the Lord Ruler and knowing that reveal where Alendi was killed by... Oh, I just had it right before I said bye. Rashek. I got memory! I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of these names, by the way. When you know that reveal, it just makes those that much more significant, and I love them. About the romance, I'm mentioning it for the second time now, but I still adore Ellen and Vin's dance. Again, they really grew on me, and that really brings a lot more of that nostalgia, especially when Ellen pulls out the fucking book. In the middle of their dance, he's just like, ah, yes, book. It was really the comedy you needed at that point in the book. It was really the comedy you needed, and it just makes those characters that much more lovable, and it makes the ending with their death just that much more heartfelt. It's so heartfelt. It really is, and I just love them. They're one of the few couples that I'll stand by forever. I love them. I really do. Alright. Next, I still stand by that Hero of Ages is a masterpiece. I stand by it. Hell, rereading it made me feel like, made that feel even more true. I mean, especially, again, when you know all the reveals, when you know the ending, and you're seeing each part come along the way, and you're remembering your reaction to some of those reveals. I remember that moment when I realized that there was a spike inside of Spook. That moment, I remember my reaction clearly, and when I was rereading that scene again, I was like, when you know what happens later. Just a great book. It's just a great book. It's just a great book. And now that I've reread the series, I actually went as far as to put The Final Empire on my favorite books of all time list. This book is now on that list. It wasn't before, but it is now, because I just... nostalgia. And I love it. And rereading it, seeing all the pieces put together, it's on my favorite books of all time. So, these two books, I love and cherish them so much. And thus you may be wondering, what am I about to say about Well of Ascension? Well, this is the book I complained the most about. period. Like, it really is. I complained a fair amount about this book. And we will get into those complaints. And while I do think this is the weakest of the 3 books, I am not by any means saying this is a bad book. In fact, you know what? No, we'll just get into complaints. I'll explain it along the way. This will work out, I promise. Something I complained about in my previous reviews, especially with Well of Ascension, was how random Reen's comments could be. And I'm mentioning this one first because I was wrong. I was very wrong to complain about Reen's comments. In fact, I was saying, like, oh, they're discontinuous. Like, the author's, like, totally forgetting to do it and now just using it as a plot point. Well, turns out there's, like, a really big reveal with that in Hero of Ages, and that, like, the reveal that Reen's comments are actually, like, ruin. And when you're rereading the series, again, it just adds to that power because you don't know which comments are actually Vin remembering, and you don't know which comments are actually Ruin talking. And it's fascinating. So that was something I complained about with this book. And this is just me saying I was wrong. My opinion has changed. And now I really like Reen's comments. My actual complaint about this book is still Zane. And as I understand many others, this isn't just me for once, still feel that the Zane plot was probably the weakest point of the series. Perhaps some people think it is one of the weakest, but I think it is the weakest point in the series. And especially regarding how Vin acted towards him sometimes. I mean, there's a point in which you're kind of transcending from human flaws, which would be fine, to plot stupidity. And in my opinion, Vin sometimes was reaching that plot stupidity kind of point. It didn't feel like it was her being genuine with her flaws. It felt inaccurate. It felt ingenuine, at least to me, and apparently some others. But, I mean, you can somewhat back up her, like, actions with what Kelsier taught her regarding certain perspectives in the Final Empire. But I seriously don't think that really covers all of her choices. And there are times when talking with the enemy can be done amazingly in books. I mean, there are really good ways to do that. I just think Zane wasn't ever that. From the very beginning, Zane was never really a character Vin should have even talked to. Period. So, I don't know. He's really the biggest reason why I rate Well of Ascension lower than the other 2 books. And, I mean, this book is filled with amazing politics. Discovers through the Terracemen, as I mentioned earlier. Next level battles and fighting. This is, like, this book has the first, like, battles and fighting. Vin's level ups in this book, her level ups are fantastic. The whole scene with the well, that caught me, like, way off guard. And the mist figures, as well as, like, the people dying in the mist, also just, like, had me so confused on what was going on through the whole book. This is a great book, and I really do love a vast majority of this book. It's just almost everything with Zane across the board I just couldn't get behind, and it just really interrupted the flow of the book for me. So that's what I think, and I still stand by that on some level. I mean, I'm sure that I don't remember Zane as well, because it wasn't something I really took away from the book the first time I read it, but I'm sure maybe I have a somewhat better perspective with some of the scenes now that I know some of the reveals, but I still think all of the interactions between Vin and Zane feel off. They feel ingenuine to me. It feels like it should not have happened. So, yeah, especially with certain things. Definitely, probably my one thing I'm critical of the most. I do have a few more complaints, and these are a lot smaller in size or very specific to me. First one is that there are a few uncomfortable moments. And when I say uncomfortable moments, I mean, like, I personally am just like, ugh. A huge example of that would be, Straff's, what's his title? Lord Straff. His threats towards Vin. I'm not going to elaborate beyond that, but he makes a certain pair of threats towards Vin in the tent. And when I read this series, I was Vin's age. So that freaked me the fuck out. And I honestly think that's valid and fair for me to have felt especially uncomfortable in that time period when I was reading that. I still don't feel great about it, and it's just uncomfortable. Sometimes having things like that in a story, like, really bring attention to, like, this is humankind, or, you know, whatever, the seriousness of the situation, the fact that people are terrible people. But also, sometimes you're just like, I think I already knew he was a bad guy. I didn't need to know he was threatening to do that. So, up in the air, up to you guys. I also wasn't a fan of Valerian. If anybody here who knows me is not surprised that I was not a fan of Valerian, it is pretty much another Sinedra kind of scenario, but also, I mean, I did know people who agreed with me that Bree should have never let that happen, period. Like, people agreed with me that it shouldn't have happened. And we know that she was rioting, and we know, like, those kinds of reveals later on, but I still think on some level, it shouldn't have happened. It's the fact, I mean, even if you set aside the whole age thing, it's really the fact that you don't know if it's actually consensual. The entire time, you don't know. And it's that uncertainty that kind of sticks with you, even after reading it, and even after knowing the reveals. And it still just kind of bothers me on some level, so I still don't like Valerian. I'm okay with Breeze, I just don't like Valerian. We don't question it. We don't question it. But questionable, I believe. Two more things, and the last one doesn't really count, but, you know, two more things. I wish we saw some of the characters more, especially, like, Ham, I already mentioned Yeoman, but Ham, Dachshund, Breeze, like, you know, the main crew, aside from Spook and Sazed, and obviously Vin and Elend, we really don't see that much in the long run. And it's like they get sent away for entire parts, and then you feel like you miss so much of that character. And really, you feel like you miss so much of their background and their story. And I'm sure there's a lot of lore out there, and I have not gotten to read Mistborn short stories yet, so there may be information in short stories. I don't actually know. But these are characters that I could still eat more information on. Like, I would love more lore about all of them. And so because I want to soak in all their, like, background and their lore and get to see them more, especially how they interact with each other, I can keep reading Ham and Breeze bantering to each other all day long. Because I want more of that, I kind of wish there were more glimpses of the characters. But also, it makes sense. And I'm not saying that that's a flaw in the series, because it really isn't. It's just I want to see them more, because I love my characters. I want to see my characters more. So, there's that. And the last one, and this is a very specific complaint, and I'm going to put this as non-spoilers. So we're back in non-spoilers right now for my last point, which is my last complaint, in spoilers as doing complaints. My last complaint is about this specific copy of these books, okay? If you are like me and you struggle with very small font size, and believe me, this is kind of small font size, and you also don't like your books falling apart, which the back of my Well of Ascension is about to fall off because of how it's made, I recommend not getting this version. So, if you're going to get this series, I recommend not getting these copies. I recommend getting the UK copies or a different version of the US copies. I just personally recommend not getting these. They're small. You're sometimes you have to, like, fully bend the book to actually, like, be able to read the words in the middle of the page. And again, the backs of my books are falling off. Like, these are seriously gonna fall off the next time I read them. So yeah, the binding's starting to break, especially in the middle too. My binding's breaking in the middle. So I just recommend not getting this copy. Personally, that's my last complaint, is that I did end up having to get the audiobooks just so I could read Hero of Ages, because the way these books are made. But really, in the end, if there's one impression to take away from the series, and you only get one impression to take away from the series, it's the absolute fucking beauty of the ending. I mean, it is. It is. But again, I feel the need to remind that there's so much more to this series than that. And we certainly do remember a lot more than that. As I said earlier, I think in the spoilers section, so much of the series is memorable that it's not just the ending that sticks out to you. It is so much along the way that you remember for a very long time. And the series as a whole is great. And a lot of very specific scenes as you go along the way are great. But if there was one very specific thing to be used as a reason to read the series, it is the ending. Because it's so freaking beautiful, and it's just a work of effing art. And no matter what you may think about the series along the way, I seriously think that this is a series where you have to reach the end before you can fully judge it. And especially now that I have read the last book and reached the end, and now that it's been a year that I've really soaked in that ending, my favor of the first two books has shot up. Really. It's all shot up. And I love this series so much. And just one more time, it made me cry. It really did. It was so good. I just cried at the ending. It was so good. It's just a beautiful series, and I love it so much, and I am very much excited to read more from this author. Brandon Sanderson, author of Mistborn, Era 1. Just a fantastic series. So, that is my anniversary review of Mistborn. So now we get into what's new and what's next. What's next? I forgot to prepare. 1 second. Alright. First, we have Abaddon's Gate. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but first we have Abaddon's Gate, Book 3 of The Expanse. I'm hoping to get through this quickly. I don't know if I will, but also the speed in which I reread Mistborn kind of has me on like a high right now, and so I think I could speed through this book. We will know very soon, but school year is in less than a month, which is kind of scary, and so I'm hoping to really pick up the pace. And also, after the reveal at the end of the last book, I think I'll speed through this. So hopefully we'll speed through this, and hopefully we speed through this. After that, we have book 4 of The Expanse as well, and I am actually renting the audiobook of this one because I'm going to be doing move-in and all those things maybe soon. So I can listen to audiobooks during work is the idea. So I went ahead and placed a hold for this audiobook a month in advance, a month ago, and I'm supposed to get it next week, hopefully, because there's a very long wait for the series. So I may do this book in audio form just because I can listen to audiobooks during work, but I can't read books during work, if that makes sense. So that's the logic there. But if I do get the audiobook, this may go a lot faster, because again, I have 8-hour work days. So that's 8 hours I could be listening to a book. Brain thinking. So there's that. And after Cybola Burn, again, I don't know if that's how you say it, but after Cybola Burn is my break book. And I officially decided that my break book is going to be a Brandon Sanderson book. It is going to be Warbreaker, because I had it confirmed by people that I do need to read Warbreaker before I read Stormlight Archive. and it's a standalone. So there's really no harm in reading this book in the middle. It is chunky, as are most Brandon Sanderson books, but, you know, it's a break from the sci-fi with some fantasy, and Warbreaker. We'll just read Warbreaker. I know a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people get kind of salty about this book and, like, not like it. Honestly, I think it's because people are comparing this book to the rest of Brandon Sanderson books, which would make sense. But I think I'll be fine. Honestly, this is me, like, predicting now. I think I'll like this book okay. So, we'll read this book right after book 4 of The Expanse, and then after this book, we will figure out if we want to dive into Stormlight Archive in the middle of The Expanse or if we want to finish The Expanse first. And I do not have any new books, but it is my birthday next week, so possible new books next week. We will see. That's all I have for today. Have a good one. I'll see you all next time when I finish Abaddon's Gate. Bye-bye.